Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Live podcast series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management and product marketing professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris, Vice President of Marketing at Pragmatic Institute, and your host for this episode. Today, we are joined by Jon Gatrell, product management and product marketing expert with stints at companies like Innovis and Stonebranch, and the instructor of my very, very favorite training class that I've ever attended. Good morning, Jon.
Well, good morning. I'm glad it was the best training, but there's so many great other instructors. So
that's true.
That are awesome. But it's great to get on chat again, and thinking about machine learning and what some of our customers are doing today around data science is definitely a good topic. So I'm glad you invited me on.
Yeah, no, and I thought it would be great to get your perspective, both just as a practitioner and then what you see as you go around training companies all around the world about how data science has sort of changed in some ways, product management, product marketing, and what we can do to leverage it more.
Yeah, I think, the threat of big data has been looming for the better part of a decade. And just, I would say in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of how do we harness that data beyond just general who's our customer, how to target, to being more how do they use our products and how can we package them in a way that meets their expectations from what the stories we tell as product marketers and the things they actually use and deliver value as end users once implemented. But I think data has always been central. I think companies, as they went to SaaS or the cloud, for lack of a better phrase, they saw they had these common platform needs around user management, customer management, service enablement, and just kind of the platform usage of data, I would say, has been scaling for the better part of the last decade. That how do we use that to figure out ROI of investment of our development dollars? How do we use insights around which features they adopt and maybe better packaging or differentiation? But I think it's the reality is the pivot table is no longer enough, right? There was a point in time that magic could happen with the pivot table, but now it's how can I visualize the data and group it in a model to make better decisions. So we're no longer collecting data and looking at data. We're figuring out how data drives better retention, drives better investments. I think that's the real difference.
How true. I do remember though, like the first time that Excel had the create pivot table button, and it was like, here's the feature that amazed me: sort by colors. Wow, I no longer had to put like a fake column for sorting. It was great when people gave me files. I love that. Pivot tables, they used to show some pretty grouping, but they might point you the right way. I don't know if they solve problems anymore as much as digging in and finding relationships. Absolutely. And I think one of the other big changes, one of the things with the pivot table in Excel is you have to have very uniform data in order to use those things. And as we have so many disparate data sources, I still need to do some data wrangling to kind of make them more uniform. But one of the powers that we have today is we just have so much data available. To your point, when we went to the cloud in particular, there's just data constantly being collected. And when we can combine those from different sources, there's all kinds of ways that we can make different decisions and make better decisions.
Yeah, structured data versus unstructured, that's a great way to look at it. Most businesses operationally have gotten their arms around the structured data. But how do you leverage kind of isolated context information from a download of an app, or how they came to your website from a given channel? Kind of what other websites do they visit as we track them with remarketing initiatives or whatever. And so, it's as much the pervasiveness of more inbound data channels as it is the richness of the data that really doesn't have that formalized structure. And that's critical to data science. How do you create the right data sets to drive your model, to drive simulations, to drive learning? And that's a challenge for lots of folks. And we're seeing a little bit of movement from a position definition perspective, or at least anecdotally, I've seen it where, product data analysts are being added to product management teams. And it's somewhat akin to the folks that are in UX that are also being added to functional product management teams as well, because they have to engage the market. But it's that engagement, that unstructured data that hopefully will provide context for us to make better decisions, delight our customers, never mind decisions, deliver value.
So you talked at a super high level about some of the ways that data can be used, right, to make retention choices or targeting choices. Do you have any great examples that you've seen?
Well, there's certainly whole solution providers out there in the space that are, how can we use our best practices in data science to improve the buying experience? AppsFlyer is an organization. I had the ability to chat with a couple of their folks, Ron and Z, and what I've heard was that the richness in data just from an outbound marketing perspective. What channels are you using? What creative are you using? Who are you targeting? What are those conversion rates? How do you knit that together to truly understand that buying journey or experience? Very often we think these are the steps. We have anecdotes to say these are steps. And now you can carve out different nurturing paths from initial ad placement and engagement all the way down to converting hopefully to a sales qualified lead and a win. So that's something we see happening. And I think we're also moving away from simplistic ratio numbers to, what's marketing contribution to a number like customer acquisition cost or CAC. We can now start seeing those discrete relationships across different services and processes that maybe help us reduce churn as we analyze how often or frequently do they use our apps or our capabilities. And so folks are no longer just looking at daily average users, but they're putting that in the context of what features do they use, what markets are they from, geographies or industries, and hopefully then how do you overlay metrics like customer lifetime value or attach rate. It's really kind of interesting how metrics now are part of the buying journey and central to how we optimize our investment. So if I were to say on the outbound perspective, kind of the theme is how do you optimize the budget or the investment for the marketing team? And when I say marketing, I don't just mean emails and leads. I mean strategic programs, content development, channel prioritization, and the like. So we're starting to see those connective tissues, being formalized from lots of folks, whether it's internal data science people or third-party vendors, helping close that gap from an outbound marketing perspective.
Well, and I think you're spot on, right? The insights we can get, the value we can see in the buyer's journey in every step, and the metrics we can do and be able to watch and fine tune are powerful. And the level of sophistication in our segmentation and our personalization is entirely different. The number of variables you consider in a segment that a machine can do, right? Versus what you're allowed, there's only so many factors that as a human, you can kind of go, okay, if I take in my pivot table, these 3 factors and I can break them up into segments that way. But we can add so many layers to that with a data perspective to make more robust and sort of 3D segments that look at a lot of different pieces.
Yeah, or it's micro segments with audiences, right? Where you're hyper targeting, unique personas in a segment of a certain scale. You use the word personalization, but I think it's kind of, it's hyper segmentation or personification of your content. How do we attract that one buyer and create the right beliefs to move through that process and create awareness? So it's, I don't envy you as a marketer these days, because you've got so many decisions to make, right? Yeah. Do we go after this geography? Do we go after this buyer? And our global expansion has to be a challenge with the localization requirements and rendering. So, as companies go global and go to, different micro segments, the data engagement or the context of that data that you can get from machine learning is critical. And that's why we see more product managers, getting skilled up on it or having formal roles in data science and product teams around machine learning and AI. I've actually, seen product manager of machine learning in the classroom before. Product manager of agricultural data was one. And so it's really interesting how the roles are starting to evolve. And now I think, much like the role evolved with product management over the last 10 or 15 years to really level of maturation, those technical product management roles are equally becoming kind of, data science roles to make better decisions of what you build and when.
It's powerful stuff. What else do you see in the field that has evolved in this area, or good examples of it?
Good examples versus bad. Everyone can celebrate the excellence of Amazon, right? I mean, those folks know so much about me as an individual, my family, and the types of messages they put before me are uniquely qualified. And, I got to imagine certainly they have a level of A/B testing I can't remotely understand. But I think that is all driven by what I've bought from them, where I have physically been when I bought things. I recently was in India, and I've gotten presented some unique seasonings from India that you typically wouldn't get presented. I imagine they're looking at my geolocation. So it's kind of interesting. And then there's Netflix, I think is probably another B2C example, right? They have however many users they have, that's how many products they have. I mean, I can look at what's rendering for, my boy Hadrian on his what you should watch now kind of homepage and mine, and they're radically different. And so it's not just, can we tell better stories? Can we create better interactions and better content for consumption, whether it's movies or features? And in fact, feature usage is probably one of the most common things to help better understand churn reduction and future investments in packaging or even pricing initiatives.
So what should today's product managers and product marketing managers think about differently or do differently to embrace these changes?
I think they got to think of it as a product. Your data is your product. Your interfaces are your product. So, what problems are you solving for your internal stakeholders? Let's say customer support, enablement. If you're a B2B company that requires assistance in onboarding, what kind of insights could you use to create new capabilities or new packaging of existing capabilities? But you can't really do that till you really understand the core concepts of data science. Isn't just I love how you brought up. I brought up now we riffed on pivot tables, but isn't it right? It's not just looking at pivot tables, right? You got to be able to have some basic understanding of how do you construct a model, how do you collect the right data to support that model, and then what are those constraints within the business and compliance that you need to put into those requirements to solve the problems for your business, your stakeholders, and your customers. And so there's a new way of thinking about data as a way to frame not just your execution, but maybe your strategy. That maybe roadmaps will become more data driven than just gut driven. I saw something recently online that like 40% of product managers in some survey still making decisions based on guts, instinct. And, that's a tough thing when you should be a steward using a process that's both discovery and validation. And the wonderful thing about machine learning, it can be both. I found an interesting pattern. I better learn about it and go out to the market and do my Nahito calls, or I've got an insight from the market. Can I validate it in my current user community and at what scale?
Great point. You find hypothesis or you find anomalies that you need to go understand the context of, or you've got a hypothesis that you can prove out. And I think even knowing what types of questions you could ask of your data, like really thinking about if I could put all this data together, what could I learn?
It's like, what's your problem statement, right?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
You know, let's frame this mission to solve this problem. How can we reduce how can we reduce churn from customers of a certain segment? Well, let's, dig in and see what data they have, what capabilities they consume, what kind of pricing or licensing models might they be on versus other segments of our customer base. So it moves just beyond the feature consumption. Is how are we configuring those from billable, invoiceable items, right? And much of that is not found today without a data scientist, because you got to have someone dig it in.
And I do think working with a data scientist is very similar to how we talk about working with development. It's exactly what you said. What problem am I trying to solve? And let me tell them that. And then they can figure out what model to use or what approach to use, as long as they understand what I'm trying to solve. And then we should be smart enough to understand the basic limitations and advantages of data, right? I think sometimes it feels like a magic thing, much like you would go to a development team and be like, make this amazing thing, and like that.
Magic doesn't happen. You're right. We do need some guide rails, and that's why we got to understand the value of machine learning and data science for business as a general space. But then, what's the uniqueness of the customers using software as a service and cloud applications? And so I think, without a doubt, I see where you're coming from there. But if you don't have those guide rails and basic understanding of concepts and constructs, it's hard to set people on the right path forward.
Yeah, it's hard to have a strong conversation with your partners there too.
Credible, right? I want stuff that doesn't exist. I've been accused of that in the past. John, you would like magic. Well, I would, maybe. I call it innovation. You call it magic. But let's raw team. Let's go. But I wish I had all this data when I was actively in building products on my first cloud platform. I wish we had the ability to play with it and put it all together in such a meaningful quilt that allows you to make better decisions.
And just that, I feel like we went from, we didn't have enough data to we had so much data, but we really weren't sure how to use it, to now we're starting to get the people with the skills and the tool sets that let us turn that data into information that we can take good actions on. It's
right. I mean, that's what the initial V1 big data craze was, right? How are you going to store it, keep it, secure it? Right. And then you kind of think about Tableau and how do you visualize it? Well, now part of Salesforce, I guess, or soon to be. Right now, how do you take that data that's structured and give it some sort of visualization and context, or at least some contours to it that you can make better decisions? And now we got not just the infrastructure to store, secure, and visualize. Now, how do we manipulate it in a way to drive better experiences, profitability, and but maybe even manage risk, right? As you look at new opportunities and try to validate them as part of the business planning activities in a given company.
Great. All right. We've talked about lots of different things today. If you could get listeners to do two things differently based on what we talked about today, what would that be?
I think probably the first thing is, do you know where all your data is? Do some sort of inventory, right? And do you know how that data is integrated and deployed across your systems? Because if you understand the sources and you understand some of these islands of databases, some of these islands of Excel, or some of these just legacy systems that are like kind of hard to get at, then you got to put together the plan of, here's the sources. Now, what do we want to do with these sources once they're together? And so you inventory in data sources. Then you look at kind of what's the relationship across those, and then put it in the context of a business problem, a market problem, and let the designers and the data scientists know who we're targeting, what we're trying to learn, and hopefully the outcome of that once that job's done.
Awesome. Anything else you want to share with us, John?
No, I think it's been I like talking about stuff that's moving, that our customers are doing, and it's certainly interesting to get on the phone every time and chat with you all.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Jon, for joining me. It was a pleasure as always. That does it for today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.